The late afternoon light of Beverly Hills fell like liquid gold through the cafe windows, turning everything, marble floors, velvet chairs, and polished espresso machines into mirrors of another richer world. Outside, among the reflections and rush of luxury cars, stood Sophie Carter, clutching her phone and the last shred of her patience. Her best friend Sarah's message still glowed on the screen. "He's here," laughing with her, like I never existed. Sophie's pulse quickened. Through the glass, she could see them. The man in a navy suit, the woman with blonde curls, and the kind of laughter that cuts through music. It didn't matter that Sophie didn't know him well. It didn't matter that she had only seen his face once on Sarah's phone. The pain in her friend's voice had been enough to turn Sophie's anger into armor. Without another thought, she pushed open the glass door. The sound of her heels echoed sharply, a rhythm of determination and outrage. Conversations died mid-sentence. A waiter's polite greeting froze in the air. Every pair of eyes followed her as she strode toward the table by the window. The man looked up surprised, but not guilty. Still, Sophie saw only betrayal. "You're nothing but a cheap fraud," she spat, her voice trembling not from fear, but from conviction. "How dare you sit here laughing after what you did to her?" The cafe fell into stunned silence. Someone's spoon clinked against a saucer. The man blinked once, twice, confusion shadowing his green eyes. "Excuse me," he said calmly, his tone too measured for a guilty man. "Don't pretend, Mark," she said, fire in her chest. "You can change your suit, but not the way you break someone's heart." A soft murmur rippled through the room. Phones discreetly lifted. The scene had the gravity of scandal, the kind that lives forever in whispers and social media clips. At the man's side, an older woman in pearls coughed delicately. Then, to Sophie's utter bewilderment, she smiled. "My dear," the woman said with a kind of delighted poise, "you've got the wrong man." Sophie froze. "What?" "This is my son, Michael Luther," the woman continued, "and he has never, to my knowledge, dated a Sarah, or anyone named Mark." Sophie's eyes darted across the cafe, and there, 2 tables away, the real Mark was slipping toward the exit, his expression a cocktail of guilt and cowardice. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I'm making quite the entrance," the woman interrupted, rising gracefully. Her pearls gleamed like tiny spotlights. "And I must say I rather like you already." Sophie blinked, mortified. I'm so sorry." Michael leaned back in his chair, watching her with quiet disbelief. He should have been angry. He should have ordered security to escort her out. Instead, he felt something unusual, a spark of intrigue, a flicker of warmth cutting through the dull symmetry of his life. "Mother, please," he muttered under his breath. "Don't start." But his mother only turned to Sophie, extending a hand. "Lorraine Luther," she said, as if announcing herself on stage. "And you are Sophie Carter." She managed her voice small now. Lorraine smiled, a storm of courage and chaos. "Perfect, perfect." "For what?" Sophie asked weakly. "To remind my son he's alive," Lorraine declared. "He's been living behind glass walls for far too long." Michael sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Mother, can we not?" Lorraine ignored him entirely. "Tell me, Sophie, do you often walk into cafes and accuse men of heartbreak?" "Only on Tuesdays," Sophie replied, before realizing sarcasm might not help. But Lorraine laughed, a genuine melodic laugh that drew smiles from nearby tables. "Good answer. Michael, you could learn something from this one." Sophie wanted to vanish. Her face burned. Her heart thudded painfully. The man she had just insulted was staring at her, not with anger, but with the faintest hint of amusement. It made her feel both foolish and alive. "I really am sorry," she said again, her voice gentler this time. Michael tilted his head, studying her. You have a talent for chaos. It was an honest mistake. The kind that goes viral in minutes, he murmured, glancing toward the people still pretending not to record. Sophie followed his gaze, mortified. Oh no. Lorraine clapped her hands once. Well, now that introductions are made, how about we have coffee together? It's not every day destiny walks through glass doors. Destiny, Sophie repeated, incredulous. Lorraine smiled, like a woman who had just spotted a miracle in motion. Yes, you barged into my son's life with all the grace of a hurricane. And I've always believed hurricanes change landscapes for a reason. Michael groaned quietly. Mother, sit, Lorraine commanded. To Sophie's own surprise, she obeyed. Maybe it was the exhaustion of embarrassment. Maybe the strange magnetism of this woman who radiated both authority and warmth. The waiter returned, trembling slightly. Will you be ordering, ma'am? Yes, Sophie muttered. Something strong, the kind that erases memories. Michael's lips twitched. Make it two. For a moment, silence hung between them, an awkward, fragile balance. Sophie stared at her cup, wishing she could melt into the porcelain. Lorraine, however, looked positively thrilled. So, Sophie, she began, what do you do when you're not avenging broken hearts? I work in design. Freelance. Ah, a creative soul. No wonder you mistook my son for a villain. He looks terribly serious when he's thinking. Michael arched an eyebrow. Thank you, Mother. But Lorraine continued, unbothered. And tell me, dear, are you single? Sophie choked on her coffee. Excuse me, Mother, Michael warned. What I'm simply asking. A woman like her should not be alone. Sophie laughed nervously. That depends who you ask. Michael leaned forward slightly, his voice lower, more controlled. This conversation is absurd. No, darling, Lorraine corrected, this conversation is fate. Sophie looked between them. The charming chaos of a mother who clearly got what she wanted, and a son who looked as though he'd spent his life running from emotion. Something about their dynamic fascinated her. Outside, the light shifted. Evening began to fall, turning the city into a mirror of amber and glass. Sophie gathered her bag, ready to leave. I've caused enough trouble for one day, she said softly. Nonsense, Lorraine replied. You've brought more life to this table than we've seen in years. Michael stood politely. Allow me to apologize for my mother's enthusiasm. I think she's lovely, Sophie said with a shy smile. Don't encourage her, Michael muttered. Lorraine winked. Too late. As Sophie reached the door, she glanced back once. Michael was still watching her, his expression unreadable, something between irritation and intrigue. She told herself it didn't matter, but for some reason, her heart disagreed. Outside, the city was painted in sunset gold. She drew a deep breath, trying to shake the lingering electricity of that moment. Somewhere inside the cafe, a camera clicked, someone posting the scandal of the day. Sophie walked away, unaware that her impulsive mistake had already become a trending clip titled, Woman Yells at the Wrong Millionaire. That night, as the video spread across social media, two very different people couldn't sleep. Sophie lay awake in her small apartment, replaying every word, every glance, cursing her temper, and yet, smiling at the memory of his voice. Michael, on the other hand, sat in his glass-walled office overlooking Los Angeles, scrolling through headlines that made him look ridiculous. Yet instead of anger, he felt curiosity, a rare, unsettling emotion. He replayed the scene in his mind, the way she had stood up for someone she loved without hesitation or calculation. There was something raw and honest about her, a kind of courage money could never buy. His mother's voice echoed in his head. That woman will set your routine on fire. He smiled, despite himself. When his assistant knocked, he straightened instantly, switching back to the polished mask of a CEO. But as soon as the door closed, his gaze drifted again to the screen, paused on the moment Sophie pointed at him, fury in her eyes. Something inside him stirred. Not annoyance, not humiliation. Something deeper. Something dangerously close to fascination. At the same time, Lorraine sat in her study sipping tea and rewatching the same video with the contentment of a woman who had just discovered destiny at work. "Well, Michael," she murmured, "you finally met someone who doesn't care about your name." She smiled, picked up her phone and made a call. "Yes, it's Lorraine Luther," she said smoothly. "I'd like to invite a Miss Sophie Carter to dinner tomorrow evening. Tell her it's a matter of clarification." She paused, eyes glinting with mischief. "And make sure my son doesn't find out until she's already there." Outside, the night settled over the city, like silk, quiet, deceptive, shimmering with secrets. By morning, a new headline would dominate the news: Lorraine Luther invites Café Storm Girl to private dinner. And somewhere in a modest apartment across town, Sophie's phone would buzz, starting a story that neither she nor Michael could ever walk away from. The invitation arrived the next morning, like an elegant trap wrapped in silk. A cream-colored envelope slipped beneath Sophie's apartment door, sealed with the Luther family crest. She stared at it for several minutes, as if the paper itself might bite. Dinner. 7 p.m. Bel Air residence. Sincerely, Lorraine Luther. No apology, no explanation. Just the kind of command disguised as courtesy that only the very rich could pull off. Sophie pressed the envelope to her chest, torn between embarrassment and curiosity. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to pretend yesterday's disaster never happened. But another part, quieter and far more dangerous, whispered that this might be her chance to set things right. By 6:30, she found herself standing before iron gates taller than her apartment building. Beyond them stretched a mansion that looked more like an art museum than a home, white stone cascading fountains, a garden glowing under 100 hidden lights. When the guard opened the gate, she almost turned back. But pride held her still. If they wanted to laugh at me, fine. I'd rather face it than run from it. Inside the foyer was a cathedral of marble and silence. A butler guided her through echoing halls to a dining room, where Lorraine Luther sat waiting, dressed in pale silver, the kind of elegance that could command both admiration and fear. "Sophie Carter," Lorraine said, rising with a smile that could have belonged to a queen. "You came. Good. Sit." Sophie hesitated. "I thought this was a misunderstanding to clear up." "Oh, it is," Lorraine said, motioning for her to take a seat. "Though perhaps not the kind you expect." She poured tea herself, a gesture both intimate and unsettling. "You embarrassed my son yesterday," she said calmly. "Most women would have been terrified of the consequences. You, on the other hand, looked him straight in the eye. Do you often confront powerful men that way?" "Only when they deserve it," Sophie replied. Lorraine's lips curved. "Splendid. You see, Michael needs precisely that. Someone who doesn't worship him." Sophie frowned. "I don't understand." Before Lorraine could answer, footsteps approached. The air shifted. Michael appeared in the doorway, freshly showered, dressed down, but still immaculate. Surprise flickered across his face when he saw her. "Mother," he said sharply, "what is she doing here?" "I invited her," Lorraine replied, unfazed. "You should thank me later." Michael's jaw tightened. "I don't recall agreeing to another public spectacle." "This isn't public, dear. This is destiny having dinner." He exhaled through his nose, visibly trying to remain civil. "Miss Carter, I apologize for my mother's creativity." Sophie stood awkwardly. "It's fine. I was just leaving." "Nonsense," Lorraine said. "You'll stay for dinner." Both of you." The butler appeared as if conjured by magic, serving roasted salmon and crystal glasses of white wine. Michael sat opposite Sophie, his movements precise, almost mechanical. The silence between them was heavy, filled with things neither dared to say. Lorraine broke it first. "Michael, remind me again when your birthday is." He shot her a warning look. 4 weeks. "And your grandfather's inheritance condition." Michael's eyes flicked to Sophie, then back to his mother. "That's private." "Oh, please. Miss Carter is practically family already." Sophie blinked. "Excuse me." Lorraine ignored her confusion. "The clause states that my dear son must be married by his 32nd birthday to retain full control of the company. Otherwise, it all goes to his cousin Daniel." Sophie froze. Married Michael's fork clinked softly against his plate. "Mother." Lorraine leaned back, unbothered. "I'm simply saying it's time you faced the inevitable." Michael turned to Sophie, his voice clipped. "I'm sorry you had to hear this." "It's fine," she lied, though her heartbeat wasn't. "Sounds like quite the family drama." Before Michael could reply, another voice entered the room, deeper, colder. "Drama," said a man from the doorway. "Try crisis. Victor Luther, the father." His presence filled the room like a shadow. Silver hair, tailored suit, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Father Michael muttered, standing automatically. Victor's gaze swept over Sophie, assessing, calculating. "So, this is the woman from the café. The one who shouted at you in public." Sophie stiffened. "That's right. I admire your boldness," Victor said. "But I dislike scandals. They cost money." Lorraine smiled sweetly. "You dislike anything you can't control." Victor ignored her. "Michael, your cousin is already preparing to assume control. The board wants assurance of stability. A marriage would solve everything." Michael's jaw clenched. "I will not marry for business." "Then prepare to lose everything," Victor said flatly. Sophie looked between them, confused and increasingly uneasy. This was no dinner. It was a battlefield. Lorraine sipped her tea as if none of it surprised her. "There is another solution," she said softly. "A temporary one." Michael's eyes narrowed. "No." "Oh, yes." Lorraine smiled, turning to Sophie. "A marriage of convenience. 1 year. Enough to secure the inheritance. You help him, we help you." Sophie stared, half laughing. "You can't be serious." Victor interjected, voice smooth as ice. "Completely serious. We'll compensate you generously." "I'm not for sale," she snapped. Michael pushed his chair back, exasperated. "Mother, father, stop this insanity." But Lorraine only tilted her head, amused. "Insanity or opportunity, darling. She's perfect. Fearless, outspoken, impossible to manage exactly what you need." Sophie rose from her chair. "I appreciate dinner, but this conversation is—" Her phone buzzed on the table. "Unknown number." She answered, hesitant. "Miss Carter, Anthony Reed, attorney for Mr. Mark Morrison. You're being sued for defamation and emotional distress. Expect the documents tomorrow." The world tilted. "What?" The line went dead. She looked up. Lorraine's expression softened, almost maternal. Victor's, however, sharpened like a knife. "Well," he said, "it seems our offer just became more appealing." "You can't be implying," Sophie began. "I can, and I am." Victor interrupted. "Marry Michael and our legal team will handle your case. Refuse and good luck facing the courts alone." Michael shot to his feet. "This is blackmail. It's strategy," Victor corrected. Sophie felt her throat tighten. The chandelier above her blurred. "You think you can trap me?" "No," Lorraine said gently. "I think fate already did." Sophie wanted to scream, to run, to throw the wineglass against the wall, but she saw the calm certainty in Victor's eyes, the quiet cruelty of the rich. And beneath that, she saw Michael silent, furious, but powerless against the machine that bore his name. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "If I say yes, what happens?" Victor leaned forward. "A private ceremony. 1-year agreement. You'll receive a settlement afterward. No one outside this room needs to know the truth." Michael stared at her. "Don't do it." "Do I have a choice?" she asked, eyes glistening. Lorraine placed a small velvet box on the table, a contract inside, folded like a secret. "Every choice changes a life, dear. Choose wisely." Sophie's hands shook as she opened it. The pages smelled faintly of expensive ink and inevitability. She could see her name already printed beside Michael's, as if the universe had signed it first. Her pulse roared in her ears. 1 year. 1 lie. 1 escape. Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sophie, you don't have to do this." She met his gaze, searching for something: defiance, hope, maybe truth. But all she saw was guilt. "You'll let me drown alone," she whispered. His mouth open-closed. That's answer enough." She picked up the pen. The sound of ink scratching across the page was heartbreak disguised as formality. When it was done, Lorraine exhaled with satisfaction. "Welcome to the family, darling." Victor nodded businesslike. "The ceremony will be arranged within the week." Sophie stood, her body numb. "I'll go now." "Stay," Lorraine said softly. "You'll need rest. Tomorrow the world will think you're a Luther." Sophie turned to Michael. He looked stricken, as though watching something precious slip away before it even began. "I never meant to drag you into this," he said quietly. "You didn't," she answered. "Your world did." She left the room, the echo of her heels trailing behind like punctuation marks to a story she hadn't chosen. When the door closed, Lorraine looked at her son. "You'll thank me someday." Michael laughed bitterly. "For turning my life into a negotiation, for giving you the one person who might teach you what love really costs." That night, Sophie lay awake in a guest room far too grand for her modest life. The sheets smelled of lavender and distance. She stared at the ceiling, replaying every word, every silence. Somewhere below, she heard footsteps, Michael pacing in the hall. Through the thin crack of the door, she saw his shadow pause outside her room, then retreat. She turned away, tears pooling in her eyes. So this is how destiny begins, not with love, but with a signature. Outside Los Angeles shimmered like a dream she no longer believed in. The moonlight fell through the window, cold and pure, illuminating the contract still lying on the nightstand, its blue ink glinting like dried tears. And as Sophie finally drifted into uneasy sleep, a thought lingered in the silence. If hearts could sign contracts, who would ever dare to love again? The city below glimmered like a constellation of false stars. From the 47th floor of Luther Tower, the world looked immaculate, untouched by human chaos. It was Michael's kingdom, a skyline of glass and order. And now she was part of it. Sophie stood by the window, her reflection ghosting against the glass. Behind her, the penthouse stretched wide and cold, its silence so polished it seemed to hum. Her suitcase looked absurd in the middle of the living room, a burst of color dropped inside a monochrome world. Michael set down his phone, the light from the screen flickering across his face. "Your room is down the hall," he said simply. "Second door on the left. Your room, not our room." The words stung more than they should have. "Thank you," she murmured, though gratitude was the last thing she felt. He nodded once and disappeared into his office, without another word, the door closing like a final sentence. Sophie exhaled slowly. The contract may have bound them legally, but emotionally, they lived on opposite sides of an invisible wall. She explored the penthouse out of sheer restlessness. The kitchen looked untouched. The refrigerator held nothing but bottles of mineral water and imported butter. Not a single sign of real life. It made her oddly sad. By the third morning, she had fallen into a quiet routine. Wake before dawn. Make coffee for 2. Out of politeness, watch him ignore it. Then spend the day pretending not to care. Michael left early, always immaculate, the scent of cologne trailing behind like a signature. He returned late, silent sometimes, carrying files, sometimes the weight of something heavier, duty perhaps. Guilt. On the 4th day, she decided to break the silence. He walked into the kitchen at exactly 7, as predictable as the ticking clock. Sophie greeted him softly. "Morning." "Morning," he replied without looking up, scrolling through emails. She stared at his untouched coffee. "You don't like it. I don't drink coffee before meetings. You don't drink coffee. You don't eat breakfast. Do you even breathe between contracts?" His gaze lifted sharp for a moment, but she held it without flinching. "I prefer efficiency," he said. "And I prefer being human," she countered. A faint smirk ghosted across his lips. "You're assuming those are mutually exclusive." "No," she said, leaning against the counter. "Just that one of us has forgotten how to be one." For a second, she thought he might actually smile. Instead, he took his jacket and left. But that night when he returned, there was something different. He stopped in the doorway, noticing the table set for 2, the faint aroma of pasta filling the air. "You cooked," he said, as if it were an accusation. "Someone had to," she replied, crossing her arms. "Unless you plan to survive on bottled water forever." He hesitated, then sat down. The first bite caught him off guard. It was simple, warm, real. "You can cook," he admitted. "You sound surprised." "I am." Sophie rolled her eyes. "I'm not auditioning for your approval, Mr. Luther. I didn't say you were." But the way he looked at her then, like she was an unexpected storm that had broken into his still sky, made her chest tighten. They ate mostly in silence, yet it was a different kind this time. Softer, less hostile, filled with things that didn't need words. Halfway through, Sophie caught herself laughing quietly, genuinely, at something ridiculous she'd said. Michael looked startled, as if he'd forgotten laughter existed. "Is that so shocking?" she asked, amused. "You sound different when you laugh, and you sound less miserable when you talk." His lips curved slightly, the smallest surrender. "I suppose that's progress." After dinner, she found him in the living room, flipping through news channels. The skyline behind him shimmered through the glass wall. He didn't notice when she sat down beside him. "What are we watching?" she asked. "The market. That's not watching. That's worrying in HD." He turned, studying her with quiet irritation and curiosity. "You really don't stop talking, do you?" "Silence makes people lonely," she said. "And I've had enough of that for one lifetime." He looked at her, something shifting in his eyes. Then, to her surprise, he handed her the remote. "Fine. You choose. Really. 15 minutes. Then I take over." The corners of her mouth lifted. Deal. She chose an old romantic comedy, bright and ridiculous, full of flaws he couldn't stand. He sighed, but stayed. Somewhere between the second laugh track and the first awkward kiss on screen, Sophie caught him glancing at her, not irritated this time, just curious. When the credits rolled, he didn't switch the channel immediately. He simply said, 15 minutes are over, but his hand never reached for the remote. Later that night, long after the lights went out, Sophie stood by the same window she had on the first day. The city lights blinked below, like 1,000 restless souls. Behind her, she heard soft footsteps. "You're still awake," Michael said quietly. "I couldn't sleep." "Is the bed uncomfortable?" "No, just the silence." He came to stand beside her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The reflection of their faces shimmered on the glass, two strangers bound by paper and circumstance. "I didn't ask for this either," he said finally. "I know." "Then why did you agree?" She hesitated, her breath fogging the window. "Because sometimes survival looks a lot like surrender." He turned to her. "You think that's what you did?" "Surrendered? What else would you call it?" "I'd call it bravery," he said softly. The words hung between them like fragile glass. Sophie looked up, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. For a moment, she saw the man beneath the armor, the one who smiled too little, worked too hard, and lived in fear of his own father's shadow. But before she could respond, he stepped back, retreating behind his calm facade. "Good night, Sophie." And then, he was gone. Days blurred into weeks. The media whispered about the secretive marriage of Los Angeles's most eligible heir. Sophie learned to navigate the strange rhythm of his world, endless board meetings, polite lies, and expensive loneliness. Yet somewhere within the polished routine, something delicate began to bloom. It was in the way he waited for her to join him for dinner now, or how she noticed his tie colors changing from gray to navy, small signs of thaw beneath the frost. Still not everything softened. Victor Luther's gaze at the office dinners grew colder by the day, his patience thinning. One evening after a long silent meal at the mansion, Victor cornered Sophie in the hall. "I don't know what game you're playing," he said, voice low, "but understand this. You may have a contract, but you will never belong here." Sophie met his stare, refusing to flinch. "Then I won't waste time trying to." His eyes narrowed. "Defiance looks charming on you now. It won't when the press tears you apart." Lorraine appeared at the top of the stairs, her tone sharp as crystal. "Victor, stop poisoning the air in my house." Victor gave his wife a long look before walking away. Lorraine descended, her eyes kind. "He can't help himself. He's allergic to women with backbones." Sophie smiled faintly. "Then I'm probably his worst nightmare." Lorraine's laughter filled the hall like sunlight. "Good. Maybe that means you're exactly what Michael needs." Back at the penthouse that night, Michael found Sophie sitting cross-legged on the couch, sketching designs on her tablet. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "A café," she said without looking up. "Somewhere small, warm, a place that doesn't judge people for the messes they make." He smiled faintly. "Sounds unrealistic." "So does this marriage," she said, meeting his eyes. Silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward this time. There was something electric in it, like two storms circling closer. He reached for her sketchpad. "May I?" She hesitated, then handed it to him. He studied the lines, the soft curves, the cozy windows, the tiny handwritten sign above the door. "Second Chance Café." "You believe in second chances?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. "I have to." Their eyes held. The air shifted heavy, alive. Then suddenly the intercom buzzed. A voice crackled through. "Mr. Luther, Ms. Rhodes is here to see you." Sophie's heart sank. Camilla Rhodes. Michael's expression hardened instantly. "Tell her I'm busy. She says it's urgent," the guard replied. For a moment, silence filled the room. Sophie rose slowly. "You should go." "I don't have to," he said. "Yes, you do," she whispered, gathering her tablet. "It's your world. Remember?" Michael hesitated at the door, torn between habit and something new pulsing in his chest. Finally he said, "Don't wait up." The elevator doors closed, swallowing him into the night. Sophie stood alone, surrounded by glass and silence once more. Outside, thunder grumbled faintly over Los Angeles. She sat back on the couch, staring at her unfinished sketch. For the first time since she signed that contract, she felt something that scared her more than loneliness. Hope. It flickered softly inside her like a candle in a storm, fragile, defiant, and utterly uninvited. And somewhere in the distance, lightning split the sky, marking the beginning of something neither of them were ready for. Rain had washed the city clean by morning, but Sophie woke with the feeling that the world had merely paused before another storm. Michael was already gone. His side of the penthouse looked untouched, perfect sheets, no trace of sleep. Only the faint scent of his cologne lingered sharp and steady, like a ghost of self-discipline. On the kitchen counter sat a note in neat handwriting. Corporate gala tonight. Attendance required. M. No greeting, no warmth. Just obligation written in ink. She crumpled the note but didn't throw it away. Something about its simplicity, its distance hurt more than she wanted to admit. By evening, she stood before the mirror, in a black silk dress Lorraine had sent that afternoon, tailored to perfection. It made her feel like a stranger in her own skin, elegant, poised, unreal. When Michael entered, he froze for a fraction of a second. He'd seen beauty countless times, sculpted and flawless. But this was different. Sophie wasn't trying to impress anyone. Her calm defiance was her most disarming feature. "You look—" He began searching for words. "Ready." Was that supposed to be a compliment? She teased softly. His lips curved slightly. "It's the best one I can offer under pressure." They left together, descending into a night glittering with expectation and danger. The Beverly Wilshire Hotel shimmered like a palace carved from crystal. Inside, the annual Luther Enterprises Gala unfolded a theater of wealth and whispers. Music floated from a live orchestra. Laughter rang like silver bells, and every smile hid a motive. Sophie walked beside Michael through the crowd, aware of the eyes tracking them, the murmured speculations. The mysterious wife, the café girl, the scandal. She held her head high anyway. Michael leaned in slightly. "Ignore them," he said under his breath. "They feed on curiosity." "I'm used to being stared at," she whispered back. "Just not in sequins." That earned a low chuckle. For a moment it felt almost easy between them. Two conspirators surviving the same stage. But then a ripple went through the room, a sudden hush disguised as interest. At the entrance stood Camilla Rhodes, radiant in a crimson gown, every movement calculated. Her smile was the kind that could slice a diamond. Sophie's stomach tightened. "Trouble," Michael murmured. Camilla approached her heels, whispering against marble. "Michael, darling," she purred, ignoring Sophie entirely. "You didn't tell me you'd bring company." "Wife." Sophie corrected, her voice even. Camilla turned slowly, assessing her like a work of art she didn't approve of. "Oh, this is her. How quaint. I was expecting someone more polished." "Careful," Michael warned quietly. Camilla laughed. "Relax. I'm just reminiscing. We do share history after all." "History," Sophie said calmly, "belongs in museums, not at dinner parties." Several guests nearby stifled laughs. Camilla's eyes narrowed, but her smile stayed painted on. "How charming. I hope you're as entertaining in court as you are at parties." Michael's hand tensed at his side. "Enough." But Camilla only brushed a finger along his lapel, a gesture as intimate as it was calculated. "I miss when you used to say that to me." Sophie's heart thudded, but she didn't move. She simply met Camilla's gaze and said, "I imagine he's better at meaning it now." The air between them crackled, two storms colliding under chandeliers. Then Lorraine appeared, effortlessly regal, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Camilla." "Dear," she said smoothly, "so lovely to see you pretending again." Camilla froze. Lorraine leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Your father sold vacuum cleaners door to door. Don't act like you were born into this ballroom." The nearby guests went silent. Camilla paled, her perfect mask cracking just slightly. Sophie hid a smile. Lorraine winked at her. Michael cleared his throat. "Mother, please." Lorraine only lifted her glass. "To authenticity," she declared. "Indeed," Sophie murmured. The orchestra swelled, diffusing the tension, but not erasing it. As Camilla retreated, Michael turned to Sophie. "You didn't have to do that. Defend myself. Engage with her. She thrives on drama." "So do you," Sophie said softly. "You just wear a better suit while doing it." He looked at her then, not as a contract, not as an inconvenience, but as something dangerously real. Before he could answer, a hand clapped his shoulder. "Michael." It was Anthony Reed, the slick attorney representing Mark in the defamation suit. His smile was all polished arrogance. "Miss Carter," he said, turning to her. "Or should I say, Mrs. Luther? Quite the fairy tale upgrade." Sophie froze. Michael stepped closer, protective. "What do you want, Reed?" "Oh, nothing. Just a friendly reminder that truth always finds a way to surface." His words were loaded, his tone deliberate. Sophie's pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. Before she could ask, flashes exploded across the room, reporters snapping photos, whispers rippling through the crowd. Someone had leaked something. A journalist called out Mr. Luther. "Is it true? Your marriage is a business contract?" The room gasped. Michael's face went still. Sophie felt her throat close. He moved fast, his arms sliding around her waist. "My wife and I have nothing to hide," he said firmly, voice smooth as glass. More questions, more cameras, more chaos. Sophie forced a calm smile, leaning subtly against him. "Play the part." Lorraine's expression hardened across the room, silently commanding control. But Victor, watching from the balcony, didn't intervene. His eyes were cold, calculating the cost of this scandal. "Let's go," Michael murmured, steering Sophie toward the terrace. Outside, the city glittered beneath them, oblivious to the firestorm brewing inside. Sophie pulled away gently. "Who leaked it?" "I don't know." "Camilla." "Maybe." "Your father?" He hesitated just long enough to tell her the answer. The wind tugged at her hair. She folded her arms, the chill seeping through silk. "You knew this could happen, didn't you?" "I didn't think it would happen tonight." "That's not an answer." Michael turned to face her, eyes dark. "You think I'd let them humiliate you on purpose? I think you underestimate what people will do for control." He exhaled, frustrated. "You shouldn't have to live like this. Yet here I am." Silence. The orchestra swelled faintly inside. Sophie looked at him, anger warring with something softer. "You could have warned me," she said finally. "Instead, I walked into that ballroom like a lamb to slaughter." Michael stepped closer, the tension between them electric. "I didn't warn you because I thought I could protect you." "You can't protect me from your family," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said, voice breaking slightly, "but I can choose not to be like them." The sincerity in his tone disarmed her. For a moment she saw not the CEO, but the man behind the mask, the one who'd started to care despite everything. Sophie looked away, afraid her eyes might betray her. Inside, thunder rolled, literal this time. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, washing over the glass terrace. Guests hurried inside, laughing, shrieking, pretending not to love the drama. Michael and Sophie didn't move. "You'll catch a cold," he murmured. "I've survived worse." Water ran down her hair, her shoulders, her bare arms. The city below blurred into streaks of light. She turned to him. "Why did you really marry me, Michael?" He blinked, rain dripping from his lashes. "You know why." "No. I know why they wanted it. I want to know your reason." He hesitated, then stepped closer until the rain between them became mist. "Because you looked me in the eye when everyone else looked at my money." Her breath caught. That's not love. No, he said quietly, but it's a start. Something in her chest unraveled. The storm pressed around them, thunder muting the rest of the world. Michael reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered, tracing the edge of her jaw down to her trembling lips. She didn't move away. For a heartbeat, the distance between them vanished, two broken pieces drawn together by the gravity of loneliness. Then the terrace doors opened, breaking the moment. Lorraine appeared, raincoat over her gown, eyes sharp with urgency. Michael, she said, we need to leave. Now. He straightened. What happened? Victor's team just received a call. Someone filed a federal investigation against the company, fraud charges. Sophie froze. Fraud. Lorraine's gaze softened as she looked at her. Documents were submitted under your name, dear. The rain seemed to stop mid-air. What? Sophie whispered. Michael's eyes widened. That's impossible. It's already in the press, Lorraine said quietly. And by morning, every paper in the country will have it. For a moment, no one spoke. The storm raged on, but the real thunder had already fallen. Sophie's hands trembled at her sides. They're framing me. Michael swallowed hard. Camilla. Or your father, Lorraine added grimly. Lightning split the sky, illuminating their faces. Fear, fury, disbelief. Sophie took a step back, rain cascading down her face like tears she refused to let fall. It doesn't matter who did it, she said softly. They'll all believe it. Michael reached for her, but she moved away. Don't, she whispered. Not unless you're ready to believe me too. He froze, and in that fragile silence, the storm swallowed everything. By the time dawn broke over Los Angeles, the world already knew her name. Luther heiress accused of corporate fraud. Who is Sophie Carter? The scandal wife behind the empire. The headlines burned across every screen like wildfire, spreading faster than truth could catch up. Sophie sat alone on the couch of the penthouse, watching her life unravel in high definition. The rain from the night before had dried, but her hands still trembled, as if thunder lived beneath her skin. Michael paced the floor, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice, usually so composed now, carried the sharpness of panic. Get the lawyers on it. No, now. I don't care about optics. We need proof, anything that clears her name. His words barely reached her. Everything inside her was a low hum of disbelief. Fraud. They had used her signature, her name, to destroy her. When he hung up, the silence returned heavy and suffocating. Say something, she whispered. Michael stopped. The look in his eyes broke her heart, more than the accusation itself, torn, uncertain, afraid. I'm trying, he said quietly. Trying to, what, fix the company or believe me? His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Sophie stood, the silk of her dress still damp at the hem from last night's rain. You think I did this, don't you? No, he said too quickly. But the evidence. Evidence. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. Evidence can be faked. Michael, you of all people should know that. Your world runs on illusion. He looked away, jaw tightening. Your father's behind this, she said. Or Camilla. Maybe both. You know it. I don't have proof. You don't have courage either, she said, her voice trembling. That struck deeper than she intended. For a moment, his expression cracked just enough to show the boy still living under his father's shadow. I'm doing everything I can, he said. Everything except stand by me, she replied. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a canyon, and they stood on opposite cliffs. A knock shattered it. Lorraine entered without waiting for permission. She looked elegant even in chaos, wrapped in a cream coat, pearls glinting under the dim light. Good, she said briskly. You're both awake. We need to move fast. Sophie rose. Is there news? Bad, I'm afraid, Lorraine said. The Federal Commission is launching an official investigation. They claim the documents were processed from your company login, Michael, which means someone framed her from inside. Michael paled. That's impossible. Those systems are secured. Lorraine raised an eyebrow. You underestimate how many devils you dine with. Sophie's chest tightened. So what happens now? Victor appeared at the doorway, his voice cutting through the room like cold steel. What happens now, he said, is damage control. Lorraine stiffened. Victor. No, he barked. You've meddled enough. He turned to Sophie, his tone detached, almost cruel. You will disappear until this investigation ends. The company cannot afford the distraction. Sophie's throat closed. Disappear. A quiet retreat. Abroad preferably. Somewhere far from the cameras. I'm not running, she said. It's not a choice, Victor replied. Michael stepped forward. Father, this is insane. Insane is watching everything I built collapse because of a scandal over a woman you barely know. Victor thundered. Do you understand what's at stake? Sophie flinched, as if struck. The words weren't new, but hearing them said aloud in front of Michael made them cut deeper. She turned to him. Say something. He looked torn, the weight of a lifetime pressing on his shoulders. Then he said the one thing she feared most. Maybe it's better if you stay away for a few days, he said softly. Her heart shattered in silence. I can fix this, he continued. But I need space. No distractions. If you're gone, the press will calm down. Her voice cracked. And what will they say when I disappear? That I'm guilty, that I ran. He didn't answer. Lorraine's hand covered her mouth, eyes glistening with disbelief. Michael. But Sophie was already moving. No, he's right. That's who I am here, isn't it? A distraction, a problem to manage. Michael reached for her arm. Sophie. She pulled away. Don't. If you can't believe me when it matters, you never will. Her heels clicked across the marble floor, the sound echoing like gunshots. When the elevator doors closed behind her, Michael realized too late that silence was the cruelest weapon he'd ever used. Sophie didn't remember how she got to Union Station. The city blurred outside the cab window, streaks of neon and rain light melting together like a memory. She bought a train ticket to nowhere, San Francisco, it turned out, and sat on a bench beneath the cathedral ceiling, her suitcase at her feet. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Unknown numbers, headlines, notifications. She turned it off and let the quiet swallow her. People came and went. Families laughed. Lovers kissed. Announcements echoed overhead. Life went on, indifferent to her collapse. She stared at her reflection in the glass wall opposite the girl who'd once believed she could survive anything. The girl who thought love might be a place of safety. Fool. A familiar voice broke through the noise. Sophie. She turned. Michael was running through the station, his tie loose, his hair disheveled, like every piece of control he'd ever clung to had finally snapped. Don't go, he gasped when he reached her. Please. She rose, shaking. You made your choice. I was wrong, he said. I wrong or just late. His face fell. I thought I could handle it, that I could fix this my way. But I was wrong. I can't lose you. The announcement for her train echoed overhead. Departure to San Francisco. Platform 3. She looked at him, her heart screaming against her logic. You already did. Sophie, please. Give me one reason, she said, voice breaking. One real reason to stay. He took a step closer, desperation flickering in his eyes. Because you're the only person who's ever made me want to be better than my name. Tears stung her eyes, but she shook her head. Then prove it. Fight for me. For the truth. Not just when it's convenient. I will. Then do it without me. The train's whistle pierced the air. Sophie grabbed her suitcase. Michael's hand caught hers. Don't go, he whispered. She looked at him, really looked. The man who'd once seemed untouchable now stood trembling, human, undone. I have to, she said, because if I stay, I'll become someone I don't recognize. And I think you already have. The doors began to close. Sophie. She stepped inside, her heart fracturing in rhythm with the clatter of metal. Through the glass, she saw him one last time standing on the platform, rain beginning to fall again, alone against the blur of lights. Hours later, as the train hummed north, Sophie pressed her forehead to the window. The landscape rolled past dark fields, the ghost of dawn. Her reflection stared back at her, fragile but unbroken. She whispered to herself, they can take everything, but they can't take what's true. Far behind her in Los Angeles, Michael stood in his father's office. The walls that had once symbolized power now felt like a prison. Victor's voice was cold. She's gone. Michael didn't answer. Good. Now we can focus. But Michael wasn't listening. His mind was elsewhere, at a train station, on a platform, with a woman whose absence had become unbearable. He turned toward his father. You're the one who set her up, aren't you? Victor's silence was confirmation enough. Michael's hands clenched. You destroyed her to save the company. I protected what matters. Victor said simply. No. Michael said, his voice steady for the first time. You destroyed what matters most. He walked out before his father could reply, the weight of generations breaking behind him. Outside, rain poured again, washing the city in silver. He lifted his face to it, eyes burning, and whispered to the storm, I'll fix this. Somewhere far away in a sleeping train, Sophie stirred as if she'd heard him. Neither knew it yet, but the fall had already started, turning into a fire, one that would burn everything false until only the truth remained. The train cut through the dawn like a blade through silk. Outside the window, the world turned gold and gray. California fields, half awake. Towns, the long breath of freedom. Sophie sat curled in her seat, a paper cup of cooling coffee in her hands. For the first time in weeks, no one looked at her like a headline. No cameras, no whispers, just silence, the kind that didn't accuse or demand. Yet even peace had its price. Every mile carried her farther from the man who had broken and bewildered her in equal measure. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the tracks fill the hollow in her chest. In Los Angeles, she had been the scandal wife, the fraud, the name in flashing lights. Here she was, no one. And somehow that anonymity felt holy. By the time the train reached San Francisco, rain had begun again, soft and persistent. Sophie found a cheap room above a florist's shop, the kind that smelled faintly of lilies and dust. The landlady didn't recognize her face from the news, or pretended not to. Either way, Sophie was grateful. She spent her days walking through the fog-draped streets, sketching the city on small scraps of paper, bridges, strangers' window lights. Every drawing felt like a quiet act of survival. At night, she worked at a diner near the pier, refilling coffee cups and hiding her past behind a practiced smile. Sometimes, she caught her reflection in the window, the woman who'd once stood beside a billionaire, now blending into the hum of ordinary life. It should have felt like defeat. Instead, it felt like freedom wearing humility's face. But freedom couldn't quiet memory. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, Michael, standing on the train platform, rain streaking his face, saying nothing and meaning everything. And beneath her anger, something softer still flickered. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the ghost of love that refused to die quietly. 2 months passed. In Los Angeles, the scandal had mutated, feeding on itself. The investigation expanded. And then one morning, the truth began to surface. Camilla Rhodes had made a mistake, a digital footprint buried in the servers she thought erased, emails traced to her payments from Victor's private accounts. When Michael saw the evidence, something in him snapped. He sat in his office. The city stretched below him like a chessboard, and realized he'd spent years protecting the wrong king. "Get me the board of directors," he told his assistant, "and call my mother. It ends today." The meeting was brutal. Victor Luther sat at the head of the mahogany table, calm as always, the predator cloaked in civility. The boardroom gleamed glass power, polished betrayal. "You can't be serious," Victor said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "You'd destroy your own family's name over a woman who ran away." Michael met his gaze without flinching. "I'd destroy the lie that's been rotting under it for years." "Careful," Victor warned. "You wouldn't exist without my name. I'd rather not exist than be what you are." Gasps rippled through the board. Lorraine sat quietly at the far end, pride glinting through her sadness. Michael threw a folder onto the table. Inside were the documents, the proof of Camilla's forged transactions, Victor's authorization, the financial trail that had framed Sophie. "This," Michael said, voice steady, "is the truth you buried." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You think anyone will believe you over me?" "I don't need them to," Michael said. "I've already sent it to the commission." Lorraine rose calm but unshakable. "It's over, Victor. You've used our son as a shield long enough." For a heartbeat, the old patriarch looked like a man stripped bare. His power, centuries of control, crumbled in the silence that followed. Michael walked out without looking back. Outside the building, the sky broke open, rain pouring wild and cleansing. He lifted his face to it, chest heaving, as if the city itself had exhaled with him. Then, without another thought, he got into his car and drove north. San Francisco greeted him with fog and salt air. He had no plan, only a direction toward the woman whose absence had haunted every breath. He found the diner by accident. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. The place smelled of coffee and rain and something sweet baking in the back. And then he saw her. Sophie stood behind the counter, hair tied up, sleeves rolled, laughing with an old man who tipped too much. For a moment, he didn't move. He just watched the way light seemed to find her, even here in the simplest corners of the world. When she turned and saw him, her smile died mid-air. The coffee pot in her hand trembled. "Michael," she whispered. He stepped forward, voice low. "Hi." The word felt too small to carry what he meant. Sophie's throat tightened. "What are you doing here? I came to tell you the truth. I already know it. You didn't believe me." "I do now," he said softly. Her eyes flickered, unsure. "What changed?" He reached into his coat, pulling out a folded document. "Proof. Camilla forged everything. My father helped her. They're finished." She stared at the paper, but didn't take it. "So you cleared your name. Congratulations." "Sophie." "No," she said, voice sharp. "You don't get to show up now and act like a hero. You left me to drown." "I thought I was protecting you," he said. She shook her head, tears trembling at the edge of her lashes. "You were protecting your family, your empire. You called me a distraction." "I was wrong," he said simply. She laughed bitterly. "You think wrong covers everything that's happened?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "But it's a start." For a moment, silence fell between them, thick, electric. "You don't owe me anything," she said finally. "You should go. I can't." "Why?" He looked at her eyes, raw and unguarded. "Because somewhere between pretending to love you and realizing I did, I forgot how to live without you." The words hung in the air, fragile and real. Sophie turned away, breathing unevenly. "Don't say things like that." Why not? Because I'll believe them. He hesitated, then reached across the counter, gently taking her hand. Believe them anyway. She looked at their hands, his warm, hers trembling, and for the first time she didn't pull away. That night, they walked along the pier in the soft drizzle. The sea stretched dark and endless, whispering its old truths. I don't know what happens now, she said quietly. You don't have to, he replied. Just stay. Sophie looked up at him. The wind tugged at her hair, salt on her lips. You're still the man who broke my heart. I know, he said, but I want to be the one who helps you heal it. Her laughter was wet with tears. That's poetic, Michael. It's honest. She studied him, the rain-soaked hair, the exhaustion in his eyes, the sincerity beneath the ruin. This wasn't the billionaire she'd met in a café. This was a man stripped of everything but truth. Do you still have that penthouse? She asked. He nodded slowly. Good, she said. Sell it. He blinked. What? Sell it. Start over somewhere smaller, somewhere real. A slow smile touched his lips. With you. She looked out at the sea. We'll see. Lightning flickered far off the coast. He reached for her hand again, and this time she let him. They stood there for a long time, two silhouettes against the restless horizon past burning behind them, something like hope rising ahead. The next morning, Sophie woke in her little room above the florist's shop. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and blooming roses. On the doorstep waited a letter, handwritten, sealed, with no crest this time. She opened it. The board is gone. So is my father. I'm building something new. Not for power, not for legacy, just for us. If you're willing to see what love looks like when it's finally honest, meet me at the old cafe in Beverly Hills. The one where it all began. Midnight. M. She held the letter for a long time, her pulse unsteady. The world outside seemed to hush, waiting for her choice. She looked up through the rain-speckled window and whispered, almost smiling, maybe destiny deserves one more mistake. The night smelled of rain and memory. Beverly Hills was quieter than Sophie remembered. No flashing headlines, no curious eyes, just the soft hush of a city holding its breath. The same cafe still stood at the corner, its sign flickering like a heartbeat. Café Lune. She paused at the window, looking in. The place where everything had started, her anger, her mistake, her entanglement with the Luther name, looked almost holy, now washed clean by time and storm. Inside, a single table by the window was lit by a candle. And at that table sat Michael. He wasn't in a suit tonight, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled, collar undone. The man who had once been carved from control now looked almost human. His eyes lifted the moment she entered. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then he stood as if rising to meet something sacred. You came, he said softly. Sophie's voice was steady, but her heart wasn't. You didn't think I would. I wasn't sure, he admitted. You have a talent for running from disaster. Maybe I just wanted to see if you'd still be one. A faint smile touched his lips. Touché. She sat down. The air between them shimmered with everything unsaid. For a long moment they said nothing. The candle flickered between them, its flame catching in her eyes. Michael poured wine into 2 glasses, slowly, carefully, as if the act itself could mend the space between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than the rain. I sold the penthouse. She blinked. You actually did it? He nodded. And the company, or what was left of it. The rest will go to a foundation mother's starting. Sophie leaned back, studying him. So you walked away from everything. From everything that didn't matter, he said simply. And what does... He looked at her. This. She tried to hold his gaze, but something in it was too raw, too real. She looked away. You think you can fix us with grand gestures? No, he said, leaning forward. I think I can't live with myself if I don't at least try. The words hit her harder than she expected. Michael, she whispered, you can't rewrite the past. I'm not trying to, he said. I'm trying to build something honest on top of it. Her throat tightened. And what if I can't? He hesitated. Then I'll still be grateful you showed me how to feel again. The simplicity of it undid her. She took a slow breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. Do you know what hurt the most? He shook his head. It wasn't that you didn't believe me, she said softly. It's that when everything fell apart, I realized I believed in you more than I believed in myself. His jaw clenched. I don't deserve that. No, she said, eyes glistening. You don't. But I did it anyway. Michael looked down, exhaling shakily. I kept every letter the lawyers sent you, he murmured. Every one I could intercept before it reached the press. I read them at night thinking maybe if I carried your pain, it would somehow balance what I'd done. She frowned. That's not redemption, Michael. That's guilt dressed as penance. He met her eyes again. Then teach me the difference. Something in her chest broke and mended in the same breath. The rain thickened outside, painting streaks across the window. The candle between them burned low, melting time into a single fragile moment. Why here? She asked suddenly. He smiled faintly. Because this is where you ruined my life. She laughed, a soft, involuntary sound that felt like breathing after drowning. And you're grateful for that. Every day. She shook her head, smiling through tears. You're impossible. I'm trying to be better than that. Her laughter faded into silence. What happens next? Michael, you've burned everything you built. What's left? He thought for a long moment before answering. A café, he said. In the city. Something small. Real. A place for people who've lost things. Her brows lifted. A café? He nodded. I thought maybe we could call it Second Chance. The name hung in the air like a heartbeat. Sophie blinked back tears. That's mine, she whispered. I know, he said softly. I kept your sketches. I thought if you'd let me, I could help you make it real. She laughed under her breath, shaking her head. You're serious. Dead serious. Her eyes searched his, and for the first time she saw no trace of arrogance, no armor. Just a man who'd lost everything except his capacity to hope. Why me? She asked finally. After everything, why still me? He leaned forward, voice steady but fragile. Because you're the only thing I ever chose. That wasn't about power or legacy or duty. You were the only choice that was mine. The air trembled between them. For a moment, neither moved. Then Sophie reached across the table, her hand brushing his. The contact was small, but it felt seismic. Michael. Don't say anything. He whispered. Just stay. Her fingers tightened around his, and for the first time in months, silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like forgiveness. When the cafe closed at midnight, they stepped out into the rain. The streets shimmered beneath the city lights, each droplet catching a reflection of something fragile and beautiful. Sophie stopped beneath the awning, watching the storm. You always pick dramatic weather. He smiled. Maybe the universe has a flair for cinema. They walked slowly through the quiet streets, their hands brushing occasionally, each touch a hesitant confession. At the corner, they stopped before the very spot where she'd once mistaken him for a stranger to hate. Sophie turned to him. Do you remember what you said that day? He frowned, trying to recall. You said, you have a talent for chaos. He smiled faintly. I was right. And you still followed it, she said. I didn't follow chaos, he murmured. I followed you. Before she could reply, he stepped closer. The rain softened to a mist, the city lights bending around them like a blessing. His hand came up, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. May I? He asked quietly. She hesitated just long enough to remember everything they'd been through. Then she nodded. The kiss was slow, unhurried, full of everything they hadn't dared to say. It wasn't the desperate kind born of pain. It was the kind that rebuilt thread by thread what had been torn. When they finally pulled apart, she laughed softly, breathless. You're soaked. So are you. Worth it. Always. They stood there, rain cascading around them, the city whispering its approval. For the first time, the storm didn't feel like destruction. It felt like cleansing. Later in the quiet of the night, they sat together in Michael's car overlooking the city from Mulholland Drive. Los Angeles stretched beneath them like a sea of stars. Sophie leaned her head against the window, watching the lights. Do you think people can really change? Michael considered. I think we remember who we were supposed to be before life got in the way. She smiled faintly. That's a nice answer. It's true. She turned to him. And who were you supposed to be? He looked at her for a long time. Someone worthy of you. Her chest tightened. You're getting good at this, saying the right thing. He shook his head. I stopped rehearsing a long time ago. Sophie reached out, intertwining her fingers with his. Then maybe there's hope for us yet. He smiled, a real one this time. Maybe. They sat there in silence, the city below flickering like a constellation of second chances. And for once, neither of them felt lost. But destiny, as it often does, was not finished testing them. As the clock neared 2 a.m., Michael's phone buzzed on the dashboard. He ignored it once, twice, until Sophie frowned. You should check it. He sighed, unlocking it. The message was brief, unsigned. It's not over. See. Sophie saw the color drain from his face. What is it? He turned the phone toward her. Her eyes widened. Camila. He nodded slowly, his mind already racing. Outside, thunder rolled again over the hills. The rain began to fall harder, streaking the windshield. Sophie looked out at the city, the fragile piece they'd just built trembling in her chest. Looks like the universe still loves a good storm, she whispered. Michael took her hand again, holding it tightly this time. Then we face it together. She turned to him, searching his eyes, and this time she believed him. Outside, lightning painted the sky white, their reflections flashing together on the glass. The city below burned softly, endless and alive, just like the love they were still learning to survive. Morning came, dressed in thunder. The storm that had rolled in overnight refused to leave. Los Angeles was a blur of wet asphalt and flickering headlights, as if the city itself were caught between endings and beginnings. Sophie sat on the couch of Michael's small, rented loft, the one he'd chosen after selling the empire he'd been born to protect. The walls were bare. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee. It felt strange, this simplicity, raw and unguarded. Michael stood by the window, phone in hand, eyes sharp and far away. What did she say? Sophie asked quietly. He didn't turn around. Camila didn't just send a threat. She sent proof that she still has something left, something she's planning to use. Sophie felt her stomach tighten. Another forgery. No, he said. Worse. Recordings. Old ones. Conversations from inside the company. My father's deals, her bribes, and my silence. Her eyes widened. Your silence. Michael finally turned. There was shame in his face, but not fear. There were things I knew, years ago. I didn't stop them. I told myself it wasn't my place. That's how it all began, with what I let happen. Sophie rose slowly. So this isn't just about clearing my name anymore. He nodded. It's about making things right. Outside, lightning cut across the gray sky like a blade. Sophie crossed the room and placed her hand on his chest. Then we ended. Together. He looked down at her, the woman he had once failed to protect, and this time he didn't hesitate. By noon, the storm had eased into drizzle. Lorraine met them at a private café in downtown Los Angeles. Even without pearls or the weight of high society, she still carried herself like a queen. I had a feeling you'd both show up, she said, sliding 2 cups of coffee toward them. Camilla's cornered, which makes her dangerous. What's the plan? Michael exchanged a glance with Sophie before answering. We meet her head on. No more hiding. Lorraine arched a brow. You realize she'll record the meeting? I hope she does. Sophie said, her voice calm but sharp. The truth doesn't need editing. Lorraine's eyes softened. You've changed, my dear. The frightened girl who stormed into a cafe to defend a friend. She became a woman who's learned to defend herself. Sophie smiled faintly. And he became a man who learned to listen. Michael gave a rueful chuckle. Occasionally. Lorraine reached across the table, touching both their hands. Then go finish this. End it so you can finally begin. They met Camilla that evening at the rooftop garden of the old Luther Enterprises building, the place that had once been Michael's fortress. The air smelled of wet earth and betrayal. Camilla stood near the edge, the city behind her glowing like molten gold. Her red coat fluttered in the wind, her smile sharp as glass. I wondered when the golden couple would come, she said. Back to the scene of the crime. This isn't a crime scene anymore, Sophie said. It's a confession room. Camilla laughed softly. How poetic. Tell me, Sophie, do you really think honesty wins in this world? I don't think it wins, Sophie replied. I think it survives. And that's enough. Michael stepped forward. Camilla, this ends tonight. You've already lost everything. Don't drag yourself deeper. Lost, she scoffed. You have no idea what I've lost. I built you, Michael. I made you interesting. Without me, you're just another heir with a cold heart. Sophie's voice was steady. Then maybe it's time he learns to live without your version of love. Camilla's gaze turned icy. And you think you're better? The woman who married for money and ended up poor. At least I was honest about what I wanted. Michael moved closer, his voice low. You were honest about your greed. That's not the same thing. Camilla's smirk faltered. You think the truth will save you. Michael pulled a small device from his pocket, a recorder. No, but it'll save the people you hurt. Her eyes flicked to it, realizing too late. Every word you've said tonight. He said every threat, every lie. It's already live streaming to the press downstairs. For the first time, Camilla's mask cracked. You wouldn't. I would, Michael said quietly, because I've spent my whole life protecting power, and I finally learned it's worth nothing without integrity. The wind howled. Somewhere below, a siren began to wail. Camilla's voice trembled. You think this redeems you? No, Sophie said. But it frees us. Camilla turned to her, rage flashing through tears. You took everything from me. Sophie shook her head. No, you gave it away when you decided revenge mattered more than peace. Camilla's expression softened for just a second, then hardened again. You're both fools. Maybe Michael said, but we can live with that. She took one last, trembling breath, then walked away, her heels striking the wet concrete like punctuation marks of surrender. When the door slammed shut behind her, silence filled the roof. Rain began again, gentle this time, cleansing. Sophie exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath the whole time. Michael reached for her hand. "It's over." She looked at him, eyes full of both exhaustion and wonder. "No, Michael. It's beginning." Weeks later, the newspapers carried a different headline: "The Luther Scandal Ends Legacy Reborn Under New Foundation." Lorraine took over what remained of the empire, turning it into the Bridge Hearts Foundation, focused on rebuilding lives destroyed by corporate greed. Victor Luther left the country in silence. Camila vanished, and Michael, the heir who'd lost everything, found something better: a life built on honesty, and a woman who believed in him again. 1 year later, the café on Melrose Avenue opened under a simple sign: Second Chance. Its walls were lined with sketches. Sophie's sketches and photographs of people who'd walked through storms and survived them. Behind the counter, the scent of coffee mingled with laughter and sunlight. Sophie stood by the window, wearing a pale linen dress, her hair catching the light. Her hands moved gently over a small belly that had just begun to show. Michael approached from behind, slipping his arms around her waist. "They love your cappuccino art," he murmured. "Someone said, 'Your foam hearts look better than mine.'" She laughed softly. "That's because yours always look like broken circles." He kissed the top of her head. "They're abstract, like life." Outside, a little girl passed by the window, tugging her mother's hand. Sophie smiled. "You know," she said, "it still feels strange being happy without having to fight for it." Michael rested his chin on her shoulder. "Happiness isn't peace, Sophie. It's the moment we stop expecting the world to be fair." She turned in his arms, eyes bright with affection. "You sound like someone who's finally learned how to fry eggs." "I have. Burned half the kitchen. But I learned." They laughed, the kind of laughter that heals more than it amuses. From the back room, Lorraine's voice called out, "Who's burning toast again?" Michael groaned. "Never mind, I take that back." Sophie leaned up, kissed him softly, and whispered, "We're getting there." That evening, as the sun sank behind the city, Sophie stepped outside to close up. The street was bathed in golden light, the same light she'd once thought she'd never see again. Michael joined her, handing her a cup of decaf. Their old joke turned ritual. They watched people walk by, couples, families, strangers, each carrying their own stories, their own storms. Sophie took a sip and smiled. "Do you ever think about how it started?" He nodded. "A misunderstanding in a cafe. And look where it brought us." Michael glanced at the sign above the door. "Second Chance. Maybe the universe knows what it's doing." Sophie leaned against him. "Maybe it just needed us to stop fighting it." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his voice barely a whisper. "You know, I think love isn't about finding light." "No," she asked, smiling. "It's about learning to see in the dark." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening like the first stars appearing above the street. "Then we finally learned." He nodded. Together. They stood there as the last light of day melted into evening, the hum of the city surrounding them like a lullaby. Behind them, the cafe glowed warm, alive, filled with the sound of cups clinking and laughter. And in that small corner of Los Angeles, where chaos once began, love had finally found its quiet, steady home. If their story teaches anything, it's that love isn't born from perfection, it's rebuilt from courage. So if you've ever lost faith in second chances, look again. Sometimes the wrong beginning leads you exactly where you belong.